Hello and welcome to Elena Meets the Author. This podcast explores how authors create a world that we can escape into. Join me as we demystify the magic that keeps us turning the page. Hi, Rufi.
Hi.
So I'm in London and you are in LA. So you can tell it's like nighttime here.
Oh, yeah. And it's bright morning sun over here.
I know. God, I'm jealous. The weather here is not like LA. But anyway, thank you very much for coming on the show. I think your book is fantastic. It's really not like anything I've ever read. I think one of the things I love about reading fiction is the escape that you get from it and immersing yourself in another world. And you really do this in this book. This is a world that I'm so not familiar with, and I really love reading about it. But then you also realize that people actually aren't that different. Even when they're in another world, they're not that different. People are complicated. They're self-motivated. There's a mixture of good and bad in everybody. And it's like what you write about the pro wrestling world. You write that people can be faces or heels, and maybe they can be faces and heels, a combination of good and bad.
Absolutely.
Your novel, yeah, definitely me. Your novel, Margot's Got Money Troubles, a great understatement of the title, by the way, was really a new fascinating world for me. It's uncomfortable, but it's leavened by a lot of humor and good writing. Margo is the daughter of a Hooters waitress and an ex-pro wrestler, Jinx. Margo gets impregnated by her English professor at junior college, and she decides to keep the baby. Margo soon realizes having a baby is both the hardest job she'll ever do and the best job. She resorts to OnlyFans, a sex site, to support herself and her new baby boy. Rufi, you write about so many serious, often dark issues like unemployment, desperation, infidelity, sex work, shame, pro wrestling, opiate addiction, religious zealotry, white trash, the impossible choices young mothers face. You write about it all with comedy and insight, and Margo is strong. She faces each new challenge with a little cry, sometimes a laugh, and then deals with it. What inspired this story?
Well, I mean, I think for me as a writer, the interweaving of life's tragic and comic aspects has sort of always been there. On the one hand, comedy is a great way of sort of leavening a work so that you can talk about these dark issues without it becoming too much of a bummer or making you want to set the book down. But I also think that the times I've laughed the hardest in my life have usually been in like a hospital or a mortuary, like there's nothing like the truly terrible moments in life to give you the giggles. And so I think that either life strikes you as sort of funny or not. In this particular story, I don't know that I was even thinking that it was going to be so dark. It started off with this really simple thought experiment. I was seeing the movie Wonder Woman with my mom at the movie theater, and we really liked it. But we both kind of agreed we were much more interested in the island of the Amazons than we were in Wonder Woman herself. And we just kind of didn't like Wonder Woman. She was sort of like, cold and sort of virginal. And we were like, why can't there ever be like a female superhero who fucks and who's just like comfortable with sex? Even like Black Widow, she's sexual, but she's so tortured by it. And we were like, why can't there just be like a female superhero who is comfortable with her sexuality? And then I just got this weird idea of taking the two ways that our culture's messed up about women, sort of the Madonna whore complex. And what if I made a character who was both a Madonna and a whore, who was a mother and a good one and a whore and a good one, like good at both, and there being no conflict? Like, how could I write such a character? And I just thought, I'll never be able to do it. There's all this cultural stigma against sex work. And there's this tendency to put mothers on such a pedestal and judge them so harshly over things like using formula or what sleep training method you use. I mean, we're willing to castigate women for nothing. So I was like, how would I ever get a reader to sign on to this character? And it was still always there in the back of my mind. And then during the pandemic, there were some stand-up comedians that I followed on Twitter, and a couple of them, as their ability to perform stand-up, evaporated overnight, were scrambling to figure out how to support themselves and started OnlyFans accounts. And so I was sort of watching them live tweet their experience. And I just noticed that the conversations around OnlyFans were a little bit different than conversations around other forms of sex work or sex adjacent work. Like I think partially because especially even for like women of our generation, most of us have taken nudes for a partner at some point. So it's no longer this idea of you go to a sketchy photographer's house and put yourself in danger to take boudoir photographs. It's like you take a picture of your boobs on the phone all the time, so that's not the scary part. And we've all also sold something online. So that's not really that intimidating. And suddenly when you're in charge, there's no creepy producer who's making you do things you don't want to do. You have complete creative control. Then what really is the problem with it? And I thought, this is the paradigm where people would be more willing to have the conversation without it suddenly getting collapsed into black and white. And so I kind of started from there.
So when these stand-up comedians went on OnlyFans, because I haven't looked at OnlyFans, did it have to become sexual when they're there? Or
well, so people are paying to follow your account. So you have to have some kind of content that they will pay a monthly fee in order to see. And so that content is usually sexual. Sometimes people do
even with comedians though.
Yeah, but I mean, they were definitely doing, it was not like, you can watch my stand up on here for money.
Okay.
Now, their sex work was funny. And they would make funny choices or it was very much informed by their personas on stage, but they were definitely aware of themselves as being sex objects and that people were paying to masturbate to them.
I read something I listened to an interview that you did where you talked about how during COVID, like waitresses were unemployed and men were working from home and OnlyFans like shot up.
Yeah, I think it went from 20 million users to 120 million users in that first year of the quarantine. So it's a large group of people participating in the OnlyFans economy. And it's one of the things that actually weirdly makes me hopeful. I know that there's been sort of a lot of questions of like, are these young women that can't understand the repercussions, are they going to wind up making it so that it's difficult for them to find employment in the future? And I kind of feel like there's just so many of them at this point that it seems like hopefully it's going to be absurd to not hire someone for a job because they used to have an OnlyFans account. I hope that that's the way the culture is trending.
Wow. It's really interesting. And you're right. There is no middleman. You are in charge of what you...
And you get all the profits.
Except for whatever you pay to the site, but probably...
I mean, I actually don't know a ton about the actual financials behind like big production company porn, but...
Yeah, it's very interesting. On a slightly different topic, I just wanted to know if you could read just one paragraph, the very first paragraph, because I really liked it.
Yes, although now I'm realizing where is a copy? They float around my office. I got one. Okay, so this is just that first paragraph, right?
Just the first
paragraph. Is the first paragraph. You are about to begin reading a new book, and to be honest, you're a little tense. The beginning of a novel is like a first date. You hope that from the first lines, an urgent magic will take hold, and you will sink into the story like a hot bath, giving yourself over entirely. But this hope is tempered by the expectation that in reality, you're about to have to learn a bunch of people's names and follow along politely like you're attending the baby shower of a woman you hardly know. And that's fine. Goodness knows you've fallen in love with books that didn't grab you in the first paragraph. But that doesn't stop you from wishing they would, from wishing they would come right up to you in the dark of your mind and kiss you on the throat.
You switch voices, points of view a lot. So you've got that, you've got the third person, you go from first to third, and you, is that second person?
Yeah, that's second
when
person.
You're doing you? And you do you again later in the book. Can you explain your thinking in assuming all these different points of view? Is it so we both get lost in the story, but then are always aware it's just a story and it's going to end? There's a wall.
Well, okay. It originated in the most homely way imaginable. It originated because I think that all writers are better at first person or third person. One is more natural to them. And for me, it was always first person. Inhabiting a voice, finding mannerisms, inhabiting a point of view. That was always my way in. And I'm a very character-driven writer. I'm a little bit much more interested in character than in plot. I've really had to like learn plot on a conscious level. but it didn't come naturally to me. And so, of course, you want whatever you don't have. So third person always seemed so glamorous and Russian and like what real writers wrote in. And so when I was first drafting, I do a lot of exploratory writing before I really let myself start writing something that I would consider chapter one. And so I was like, this is going to be the book where I figure it out. I'm going to figure out how third person works. So I was writing sections in first, and then I was rewriting them in third. And I was really just trying to understand all the levers in the cockpit and what I could do in one that I couldn't do in the other, and how to get comfortable and cozy and close enough to my character in third that I could really render her experience. And as I was doing that exploratory writing, I was also grappling with what the themes of the book were. And in so many ways, I mean, this novel had many titles. Margot's Got Money Troubles is not what the original working title was, but one of the titles I pitched and was shot down was Portrait of the Artist as a Young Sex Worker, because it really is a lot about art. And it's about persona and the creation of a fictional self that you can then do incredible things with that we call art. And so Jinx has his persona and his like kayfabe lifestyle with wrestling. Margo makes a persona for herself called Hungry Ghost. And I just thought, isn't it interesting that I'm putting on the Margo mask just as surely as Margo is putting on the Hungry Ghost mask when she performs, you know, and just understanding that part of the reason I'm interested in these questions of artifice is because I am literally a technician of artifice. That's what a fiction writer is. And so I just thought maybe if I can bring in these elements of the ways that the novel itself is mirroring the themes that the novel is attempting to explore, then I can get these different iterations of this concept of persona to sort of reflect off of each other in a way that will be interesting. But I still wasn't sure if it was going to work. So I was like trying to do it, but I was sort of worried about breaking too often. And so I was sort of like hesitant about how much to include it. And then my agent, I was sure she was going to tell me to stop doing it. And she said about the switching to first and third person. And I was like, oh, here it comes. Because I loved it so much. Like I wanted to keep it. And she was like, what about if you did it more? And that was like the most incredible moment of artistic permission for me, of just like get even weirder with it. Make it so central to the book that no one could tell you not to do it. And so that's what we kind of did as I was rewriting it. And that's when I started weaving in all the scenes with Mark and taking like that class on, you know, narratology and really trying to make it central to the book.
No, you did. And it's funny, I don't know if it's related, but when I listened to the book first and I didn't notice it. When I read it, I noticed it immediately.
I think it's really interesting. Different people have very different reactions to it. I hardly notice it when I read it, even when I'm reading it on paper. My brain, for whatever reason, it doesn't register very much when I switch from first to third because it's still clear to me who we're talking about. But some people, right. I know some readers have really been like, this was wildly confusing. I could not understand what was happening. So I think people have different kind of information processing systems. And I'm sure it depends on whether you're reading it, whether you're listening to it, and then also just maybe the way you're wired up.
Yeah, exactly. No, when I was reading and I'm like, wait, but then it wasn't like I didn't understand. It was just like, wait, she switched persons. I knew what you were talking about. I knew who the characters were. Okay, let's see. On the similar thing, you kind of mentioned this early on. Margot's English professor, Mark, and also the father of her baby, Bodhi, tells a student in his class, you are trying to have a relationship with the character. No, you aren't trying to have a relationship with the character. You're trying to have a relationship with the author through the character. And then later in the book, Margot's love interest, JB, asks, when you fall in love with a book, is it the character or the author you're falling in love with? So this is exactly what you're kind of talking about.
Exactly. I mean, I think for me as a very lonely, chubby child who fell in love with books, communing with those other minds and feeling sort of the ripple of intelligence behind a story offered me a kind of intimacy that really wasn't available in other aspects of my life. There's all this distance. Like you never can really know a writer. You know, you feel like you do. You think like, oh, I've read every single one of your books. they're a huge part of my own mental imaginative landscape, but you still don't know that person. You could, in fact, meet a writer you admire and then discover you don't like them at all, that they're a terrible person or they're mean or they, whatever. So there's all this distance that sort of enables something truly intimate to happen. Like one of the most sort of intimate human experiences, I think, is like experiencing a story or a whole world or a series of people that are all created by one mind. And I think there's something fundamentally communicative in art that is about connection. It's that whole E.M. Forster quote, "only connect." I think that that's the root of all art, but it's just so interesting that we have to do it in this way that also kind of prohibits actual direct connection.
Mm-hmm. It also with Margot and her OnlyFans site. That's her imagination, and can you get to know her through these characters that she
and there's a similar
conveys.
amount of, she's selling a fantasy, right? She's selling a fantasy and she's aware of what her fans think about her. Like, and sometimes she thinks that they are treating her like a little like Tamagotchi, like a little tiny woman that lives in their phone and they can like send her dollars and then she'll do what they say. And that it's a fantasy of control. She sort of tries out all the different ways that she thinks that the men who interact with her are using her as an object of fantasy. But I think it's also troubling, or at least it was troubling to me artistically as I was trying to understand fiction and how it worked. There is a way in which fiction is wish fulfillment. And it is wish fulfillment in part because you always have to, in order to keep reading, you have to prefer the book to real life. It has to be better than sitting in the chair in your living room is, right? Or else you'll stop reading. So that's like the basic mechanics are that it has to be better than life. And so you have to develop a certain energetic level that is capable of sustaining someone's attention. But also, for instance, you'll notice that children in literature are not real children. They're always precocious. They never throw fits, or if they do, they're very necessary for plot reasons. They're never boring. They never want to have like 10-hour-long conversations about which Pokemon would win. They're fictional children. And similarly, Margot is an idealized 19-year-old. I wouldn't expect any 19-year-old on the planet to deal with this with as much aplomb and grace as she did. And there were still readers whose response was, "I wanted to strangle her. She kept making bad decisions." And I was like, my gosh, you should meet a real 19-year-old. They're idiots, but there is a way in which like a novel is always, it is always a fantasy in the same way that whatever a sex worker is portraying is a fantasy, in the same way that even the kinds of physiques that wrestlers are showing you, the kind of strength. I mean, a real fight, you don't do a backflip in the middle of it. Right. But it's this fantasy of what if fighting were like beautiful. And the fantasy is, I think that we have like obviously a really strong drive towards the fantastical. We are naturally drawn to it, and also a suspicion of it and a suspicion of the part of ourselves that likes it. And so in some ways, I think this book is like a defense of lying. It's like, it's not all bad. Don't get too worried about lying. Sometimes lying is good.
And then sometimes I feel guilty because you read a book and you are escaping your real life.
Sure. You watch a Shakespeare play and you're escaping. I mean, escaping's not so bad.
Yeah, escaping is like, great. That's the thing is it bad? I'm like, because it's different than, Instagram or TikTok when you're reading a book. But in some ways it's like, but is it? Because I'm going into I guess you use your brain more.
I guess, but I am suspicious of the rhetoric that claims that fiction is some sort of ultimate moral good and that it improves people to read. And especially people who want to claim that reading as a hobby somehow like makes you morally superior to people who don't read. I think that is probably a load of garbage. Aren't you still interacting with storytelling and abstract ideas when you're watching movies or when you're watching TV, especially TV with as good as it's gotten? Or people love to hate on YouTube, but like, I don't know, I watch a ton of YouTube and I think it's made me way smarter. I get to like, you can watch anything on YouTube. You can watch like physicists argue about ideas. You can watch anthropologists explain different digs to you. You can watch anything you want.
Wow. Okay.
Sorry.
Good point. No, good. No, all very good. Can you talk about the research you did for this book?
Sure. So there were two main arms of the research. One is the wrestling research and one is the OnlyFans research. So I'm going to talk about the wrestling first, because I'm sure people are more interested in the OnlyFans. So then we can end on the exciting OnlyFans research. But so the wrestling research basically was, I didn't even know wrestling was going to be part of this book. I just happened to get obsessed with pro wrestling at the same time. And really, I remember like walking the dogs with my mom, and I was just telling her, I mean, because wrestling just has this rich literary tradition where almost every wrestler of note has one, if not multiple, published memoirs. And so the moment I got interested,
It's so interesting.
It's so interesting. I know. Well, they're
like, why?
Well, because wrestling fans are rabid enough, and I think because of the kayfabe, wrestling fans are desperate to know what really happened. You know, they're desperate for an unedited version of the show that they've been seeing. They have their guesses. Were you really injured, or was that a fake injury? And so they're desperate to get behind the scenes footage. And then I also think that a lot of wrestlers are sort of bigger readers than people would think, because especially before smartphones, I mean, you're spending all your time in cars and buses and planes going from venue to venue. What are you going to do but read a book? Most of these guys read a ton. They may not read, like, I'm not saying that they're all reading like Husserl or something, but like maybe they're reading sci-fi or fantasy, but it's not like they're not a not bookish type of person. And so it's not that intimidating to them to think about writing a memoir, although I think most of them do work with ghostwriters. But a few of them notably did not. You know, Mick Foley, who's one of my favorite wrestlers, had published multiple memoirs and a novel, a very weird novel that I secretly love. And so they're just an interesting lot. So basically, I was out walking with my mom, and I just kept telling her different stories about wrestlers shitting themselves. And she was like, if only there was some way that you could work this into your book, and then I wouldn't have to hear about it quite so much as I'm currently having to. And so at first I thought, oh yeah, but I don't want Margo to become a wrestler. And then I was like, oh, well, what if it was her dad? You know, what if that was just another, because I felt like it would give us a way of understanding making a living by taking risks with your body. I just felt like the parallels to sex work were close enough, and the parallels in terms of persona creation. And so that's sort of how the whole book began to come together. But basically for wrestling, I just did a ton of reading, a ton of listening to podcasts, a ton of watching, you know, summaries of various matches in the 90s. And then for OnlyFans, I really wanted to get it right. And normally I'm very spoiled as a fiction writer, and most people want to talk about their jobs. Most people are desperate. So like when I had to do legal research for Knockout Queen, I called a random defense attorney from the phone book, and he talked to me for 4 hours. Like, that's normally how it goes, because people are just interested in talking about themselves, you know, because who wouldn't? Everyone wants to talk about themselves.
Right.
So this was not the case with OnlyFans girls, because guess what? Everyone was sliding into their DMs. You know, I was not the only one curious about what it was like. And so I realized after trying to contact them, I mean, first of all, they don't have emails posted anywhere. They don't have like a web page the way that someone who's trying to be found would have a web page. In fact, they're trying to not let people have access to them because there's scary people who want to kill them. And certainly they're getting way too many DMs to personally monitor that on a platform like Instagram or Twitter. So I made an OnlyFans account, and I would send a $50 tip and then a message saying like, I'm a novelist. Like I promise, like an actual real one. Here's my name and names of books I've written. I'm writing a novel that has a character who's doing an OnlyFans account. I really wanted to portray sex work as work and not have it be exploitative, but I really want to get the details right. I would love to hear about your experience. I'm willing to pay you this much per question, blah, blah, blah. And even with financial incentives, it was not like people were lining up to talk to me about this. And in fact, there was a lot of just hesitancy. Any question that even veered towards the personal, like, even a question that I thought was phrased in like a neutral way, like, how have your feelings about the work changed from when you first started to now? Something like real open-ended like that. They'd be like, I don't feel comfortable talking about that. So there's like a real
super private,
super guarded. And that was kind of an education in and of itself in terms of understanding just how bombarded they are with people trying to get at them, people trying to get under the facade and pry off their mask and get something from them. And I really was filled with respect, honestly, for how good their boundaries were. I did ultimately find a couple models who were willing to answer questions more in depth. But I didn't feel, it's part of why I wanted to keep the book focused on that early period of starting an account, because I really wasn't sure what happens to you psychologically if you do this work for 3 years. You know, I think it wears on you in really specific, unique ways. And I did not have somebody who was willing to take me into that level of confidence where I felt like I could understand and do it any justice. But I did feel like with what I got from all these different models and my own just imagining myself doing it and what my reactions would be, I did feel like I could portray the beginning, like the first 3 months of trying to have an account. So that's sort of why I limited it to the first part of her career. And then I got really lucky and wound up with finding an OnlyFans model who had once also worked in publishing and so sort of understood, who was willing to do a full manuscript read. And that was insanely valuable. One of the things that was challenging is because this book is set in 2017, 2018. So finding people who had been on OnlyFans during those years was almost impossible because a lot of them aren't still on the platform. And the internet changes so fast, and we have a lot of cultural amnesia about how fast it's changed. So for instance, in 2017, 2018, if you're thinking about TikTok of that era, Charli D'Amelio didn't even have a TikTok account yet at the time that the Margo book takes place. But it's really easy to take our experience of TikTok that we have now and project it backwards and not remember what the platform used to be like. So it was really hard. I never did succeed in finding someone who'd been on both platforms during these years. And so if you were on both platforms during these years, I'm sure I got a ton of stuff wrong. I tried real hard. I'm sorry. You know.
When was OnlyFans launched?
2017.
Oh, so it was really new.
Yes.
So Margo was cutting edge.
And there's a lot of girls who have taken, I mean, part of the inspiration for Margo was seeing the ways that girls had built these fun and interesting personas and then were using TikTok to promote their accounts by making non-sexual content that would then funnel people into their accounts. And I was intending for Margo to be sort of an example of a pioneer of that style.
Yeah, you get a lot more into the business of it.
Yeah, and there was a lot more technical business side that was cut. Originally, this book was much, much longer, but we really wanted like a tight, fun reading experience. And I think I had to write out for myself how I really thought they would go viral and convince myself I understood the algorithms. And there used to just be so much more and just so much more of them trying a TikTok and it failing and them trying to go viral and it failing. And we really just tried to foreshorten a lot of that to make it more readable, basically.
I think that was a good move. Okay, let's see. Oh, yeah. So I read that you grew up with a single mother, not really knowing your own father. From what personal experiences did you draw on for this book? Do you love Arby's?
I know people are always so disappointed. Okay, so I like Arby's. I don't think it's gross, but it is not my go-to like gross fast food. So like if I'm sick or stressed or like something bad has happened, it's really embarrassing. I think that my fast food is more embarrassing than Margot's because hers at least has some sort of like ironic hipster chic to it. Mine is just kind of depressing. But for me, it's Panda Express. For me, it's always going to be hideously cheap American Chinese food is like the most comforting thing that I can imagine. So, and it's like, it's so gross. It's like take chicken and make it a donut and then pour like sweet and spicy sauce on it. And that's essentially what I want. It's like the densest caloric thing you could possibly eat is like,
Panda Express. Okay.
Oh yeah.
Never had it.
So
yes.
Which is not to say I don't also like actual good Chinese food. I do. I just like have a separate category and love of Panda. But the point is, I think that there are a lot. So the things that I think I took from my own life are, now my mom has a really different personality than Cheyenne and a really different life background. You know, like my mother was an actress and she has a master's degree in theater and has a whole different vibe. But there is a dynamic between a single mom and an only child that is where you're kind of like buddies and you go on little adventures together. And me and my mom did a lot of road trips and we had a lot of like little rituals that our idiosyncratic household made together. You know, like like the same way that they do baby foot peels on Thanksgiving. And now she's thinking about Kenny joining the family. And she's like, what's going to happen to all our weird little, just me and her rituals? And I think also the sense of like learning, part of growing up is learning to see your mom as a person and understanding the ways that her life was affected by being your mother. I think that I didn't understand how much my own mother loved me until I had children. I don't think you can really conceive of how encompassing a mother's love is until you have your own babies. And then you're like, oh, she would have died for me. Like, it wasn't just like she made me sandwiches. Like, she would have like beaten a dog to death with a shovel to save me. Like you once you experience that love yourself, you're like, oh, wow, I did not know that I was ever loved like this. And you also just understand how much labor it takes to raise a child, how many hours of wiping the butts and the snots and the making the food and how tiring it was and how lonely it probably was for her. So I had done a lot of thinking along those lines about my own mother when I had children. And so I think I tried to give some of that to Margot, her understanding her mom anew through having her own child.
I'm a grandmother, and I think this is going to be far removed, but I thought about being a grandmother. I remember my mother as a grandmother when I became a grandmother. And also I see my daughter, with she has 2 babies. It's lonely.
It is.
It's hard work. And to be a single mother, you don't have anybody to talk to at the end of the day.
Exactly. And you don't have, I just remember asking my mom about it, and she's like, it was hard when things were hard, not having a co-conspirator, but in a way it always felt easy because like, whatever decision I made, I wasn't going to have to negotiate with somebody else. If I thought you needed to be pulled out of that school, I could just pull you out of that school. If I thought this doctor was a piece of shit, we could go to a different doctor or whatever. She didn't have to negotiate. But she said it was hardest to not have anyone to share the happiness with, to not have anybody to be like, oh my God, she's so cute with, to have that sharing that you get to do with a partner of this sort of wonder and splendor as you're just bewitched and falling in love with your child. To have that alone was, she said, in some ways harder.
What's interesting though, your book, she's not alone. She's single, but she's not alone. Single mother, but she's not alone.
Yeah. And I think that was figuring out Jinx and him entering that storyline. And then Susie, I didn't anticipate being as big a role in the book as she wound up becoming. Because, in the beginning, I'm like, oh, she has all these roommates and they've got to be funny and quirky and stuff. And then gradually, I don't know, I think I just must have secretly loved Susie all along because by the end, she became kind of one of my very favorite characters. And I think that so much of Margot's loneliness is eased by having Jinx there and having his help and also like his sense of like, no, this is how you take care of a baby. This is fine. This is not fine. She doesn't have any experience with babies. And that is maybe something from my own life. I got pregnant when I was 26, which is a really far cry from 19. But it was also, I was the first of my friends to get married and I didn't have brothers and sisters and I didn't have cousins that I was close to that had had babies. And so literally the first baby I ever held was my own baby. So I did not know how to do anything. And I was super scared of messing up.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. It's terrifying. I can imagine. I remember that. Your characters are so colorful. And while I definitely loved Jinx, Margot's father, I did really love Cheyenne. And I was just, she's so flawed. And Margot still loves her and forgives her and because she's her mother. Did she just come to you?
Dude, she just came that way. And it's funny because I don't know that I've ever even really known anyone like Cheyenne, but she just like, the first time that I was trying to write a scene, I knew the mother was going to be important. And then she just kept saying these ridiculous things that I wouldn't plan ahead of time when I was writing the scene. She would just be like, I discovered they had all this stuff about dressing and she just sort of came alive. I didn't do a lot of, it was not difficult to write Cheyenne. She always was just there. And I very much if there's one thing that I could go back and redo is that I feel like a lot of readers I've seen just got so angry at Cheyenne that they kind of weren't on board with Margot's. I think maybe it's also because like I literally am an only child with a single mom, but she's my only family in the entire world. There is not a thing that my mom could do. It would have to be so egregious for me to go no contact with my mom, because if I did, then I would have nobody. Like, you know,
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's like you don't get to request a new mom if yours is flawed. You know, you've got either this mom as she is or no mom. Those are the two options. And for most people, they're going to choose a flawed mom over no mom unless it becomes a real problem. And so I felt like that was emotionally true, but I do kind of wish there's so much, we're so harsh on our mothers as we're differentiating and growing up and deciding who we want to be. It's very easy to define yourself against your mother and say, I'm not going to be like that. I'm going to be like this. And so Margot's caught up in the thrust of that, and then is majorly betrayed by her mother. But I wish there was a way of going in and like trying to layer in a little bit more about what all of this looks like from Cheyenne's point of view. Because Cheyenne knows exactly what's coming for Margot and is trying to tell her. And Margot's just like not listening and then crying when things go wrong. And it must be so frustrating. It must be so frustrating watching your daughter, who you thought you set up everything so that she could succeed and have this life that you're never going to get to have. And then she just throws it away. And so it's one of the things that I hope that they really explore in the show.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about the show.
Well, I mean, that was just the whole experience with the show has been so wild because it never happens this way. This is the most insanely lucky series of events that I know about in terms of a show getting turned. It just feels like it's been charmed. The whole thing has been charmed. Like, so it's David E. Kelley writing it, A24 producing, starring Elle Fanning, Nicole Kidman, Michelle Pfeiffer, Nick Offerman, being straight to series order at Apple TV. They're starting shooting this winter. I mean, it's insane. It's all happened really, really fast. And it's like every single person involved, it like is so wildly intimidating to me and so cool and so good at what they do. It's like a dream team. And I mean, there are plenty of books that are good that don't get to have this happen for them. This is an anomalous thing that has happened. And so it's just really fun to watch.
Do you know which parts they're playing? I mean, obviously, Elle Fanning is.
I do. So Elle is Margot. Nick Offerman is going to be Jinx. Michelle Pfeiffer is Cheyenne. I don't think I can say who Nicole Kidman is. I think that is kind of a secret.
I was like, is she the lawyer? Because there aren't that many.
It is possible that
female
maybe there's going to be a character who's not in the book.
Oh,
maybe.
Okay.
I don't know.
Maybe. Okay. Because I was like, when I heard that, because I was I think I can definitely see Michelle.
Yeah. Oh, I think she'll do a devastating job.
She will be great. And how involved are you?
Well, I'm an executive producer, which gives me a lot of freedom in terms. So in part because like I've never written TV before. And so I also feel like there's a kind of a one-to-one relationship between novels and movies, where you can really make a movie that just sort of is a slightly altered version of the book. But with a show, you have to let it depart from the book. It's going to get so much bigger than the book. And also, I love the idea of if it went on for multiple seasons. I mean, if they get that lucky to be able to explore the business between her and JB. And I mean, you could go any number of places with it. But I also realized I didn't want the next, like, in the case of radical success, I didn't want the next 5 years of my life to still be Margot. I had another book that I was really dying to write. And then also, when someone as storied and talented and sort of just like a giant like David E. Kelley is like, I want to write it. You're not like trying to grab the pencil out of their hand, right? So I was like, yeah, you write it.
And no.
But I do get to like read the scripts and comment. And I think like I am useful in terms of like, I think I have more recent taking care of babies experience. I think I may have the most food service experience in terms of restaurant scenes. And then like, wrestling too. I like really want the wrestling references in the show to be good. And so I'm really just artistically, it feels like I'm learning so much just watching the different decisions that David E. Kelley has made in terms of how he's setting up the scenes. And a lot of times I'm like, oh, I should have done it that way. That's way smarter. It feels like a masterclass education, just getting to see how he's translating it. And I view my role more as like, I don't think TikTok works like that. Like I'm more of like a little fact checker.
Okay. Well, anyway, the book is great. So back to the book. So you challenge a lot of preconceived notions, like Margot's best friend doesn't seem to have Margot's best interest at heart, while Maribel, the child protection officer, doesn't seem to have Bodhi's best interests. Meanwhile, Margot's absentee cheating father turns out to be kind of a hero, and Mark, the loser professor dad, isn't all that bad. Is the point that you're trying to make is that you shouldn't judge people so quickly just because of how they appear, what labels they may have attached to them?
Well, I've just always had a really hard time judging people at all. It would be much easier if people were all good or all bad. It's an abiding artistic preoccupation for me, the impossibility of making moral judgments about people. I think that it's in part because I come from a family with like a long history of alcoholism. And so like lots of people in my family are both really lovable, charming people and like have done horrible things. And so reconciling that even as a child, trying to understand like what was up with grandpa was part of why I became a writer in the first place. And so I do think that I tend to be more interested in moral ambiguity than in being able to create clean lines. And so my tendency with a character, if they are leaning too much in one direction, is to sort of explore what are the good things about them. And I think that with, say, like a character like Mark, he is in some ways in love with himself and very self-aggrandizing. And, you know, he makes all these melodramatic, he takes his own emotions very seriously, right? And he's like, he wants to keep writing her love letters. And he's like, I deserve to get to have this affair because it's keeping my soul authentically alive. And otherwise my life is dead, a dead responsibility. And and that makes him a really bummer to be married to. But it also is the same qualities that let him overflow with joyful tears seeing his son for the first time. You know, he is carried away by his emotional experiences and prioritizes them above the wellness and safety of others. And that can be really beautiful and absolutely a nightmare. And so I'm always just sort of interested in those qualities that are good in some situations and really negative in other situations.
I also like the way you had characters changing. So Mark, judged Margo, thought she would be too young, and then saw, as a mother, saw how much she'd matured. And also Jinx changed, he was all against the OnlyFans, and then he thought about it. And he changed, and he realized, actually, it's not that different than professional wrestling. You're using your body, and you're creating a fantasy, kind of. So you also have characters that develop. And
yeah, I mean,
like in real life, I guess.
I guess, although,
Hopefully.
I mean, it is both. I feel like it's one of those paradoxes about human beings, which is that unfortunately, everything changes and nothing remains the same and nothing good can stay. And, you get old and everyone inexorably changes. And then at the same time, sometimes when you really wish someone would change, they absolutely do not. And they stay broken in that same exact way for 30 years. And so it really is like some things change and some things stay the same.
That's a good point. Yeah.
And you never know really what it's going to be. But I think about it for myself all the time. Like when I feel stuck, just opening the door to like, well, what are all the possible ways that I could respond to the situation? And because I realized sort of that I was writing about that I wanted to show the actual mechanics of female empowerment. I think that having children was a surprise empowering experience to me. I had not been told that it would be empowering. If anything, I'd sort of seen a lot of like cultural messaging that it would hold me back. And certainly it's a big time suck and it will like steal a couple years from your career. But also if you're a person who has trouble saying no, have 2 little boys, you'll get real good at it. There are so many ways in which like when you're forced to deal, when you're having the night that seems like it won't end and you think, I can't do this, then you discover that, in fact, you can. And it is a really radically empowering experience. And so I wanted to write about that in terms of the normal arc of a coming of age novel, in terms of artistic empowerment, and also in terms of her discovering her power through motherhood itself and like painting a portrait of motherhood as being empowering because you realize you're willing to do anything to protect this baby. And so I guess that was...
And she's a good mother.
Yeah, which is a good mother. But so I wanted to sort of take that idea of like, stepping outside the script of what you think is allowed or not allowed. And in the same way that in The Great, she realizes all of a sudden, like, oh, I could plan a coup. I could kill a king, you know? And I think that especially women have a very constrained series of actions or sort of modes that we are encouraged to embody that's like societally acceptable. You know, you don't want to make people angry. You don't want to upset people. You want to always seem sweet and hardworking. You don't want to, you don't want to be called a slut. You don't want to be thought to be any of these ways. And I tried to sort of present that in the book when she's going through that moment of turning heel, that there's something empowering about having a stadium full of people boo you. When you're no longer chained to people's good opinion of you, you access kind of a realm of radical freedom where you have more options.
Right. That's true. And also she's always searching how to be a good person, how to be a good girl.
Yeah.
And she doesn't really know how to be good because, yes, society is so limiting. And then not only is she on OnlyFans, but then she starts making a lot of money. And that's even worse. Then you're really bad.
Society does not know how to feel about women that make a lot of money.
Yeah. So you deal with a lot of conflicts. What was the hardest part about writing this?
Like in terms of a character who was particularly difficult, or in terms of like the actual process start to finish of writing the book?
Not so much the character, more like a theme.
Okay. Well, I mean, because I was going to say, in terms of the character, in a weird way, the character I struggled the most with writing was JB, in part because he is so much a fantasy. And I think I have like a natural 90s romanticization of the idea of two strangers falling in love who've never met each other that perhaps does not translate as much to a younger audience, you know. But I also, in the original version, I had him be like in his early 30s and like chubby and probably a much more realistic version of what the kind of guy who would be spending this kind of money on a site like this would be like. And she just is turned on by him. And she just like, is like, she likes his body. She likes the way that he is. She is into it. And I just got a lot of feedback. People just could not get on board for this romance in when he was like that. They were like, give her someone closer to her own age. She's already done an older man. And I was like, okay, yeah, you're right. I do like the idea of him being younger. And then they were like, and he has to be hot. And I'm like, why? Why does anybody have to be hot?
I was so happy that he was hot.
I think that there maybe is just something wrong with me. I cannot tell if I'm sexually attracted to somebody until I get in the same room with them. Like for me, it's not really a visual thing. It's like a smell. And so I think I may be further out on that spectrum than most people, but I don't have any kind of visual type with men or women. Like it's not possible for me to say if I'm attracted to somebody just from a picture.
You have to meet them.
Yeah, I have to smell them.
You have to smell them. They say that smell is it can really be a turnoff. If it's not the right smell, it's like, forget it.
Well, and there's all this research that like women especially are literally smelling somebody else's like chemicals from their immune system. And they're looking for an immune system that is different enough than theirs that it will produce good offspring. So if they smell too close to your own immune system, then you're kind of But it's like a real genetic thing that we do.
Interesting. Okay. All right. So he was hard to write.
He was hard to write. In terms of like themes that were difficult, I think I had a really hard time I knew I wanted to really refuse any prurient interest that the reader might approach a book about sex work with in hoping to see Margot degraded sexually. But I also didn't want the book to be prudish. I didn't want to give the impression that I thought sex was dirty or that I was unwilling to describe sex. So it's really hard finding, like, I knew she was going to have to show the full vagine, as she refers to it. But I was struggling to find like the way of doing that felt authentically herself and like she could own it and be empowered by it instead of it being a moment that she felt yucky about. It's like how to balance the mores of sex in the book was definitely one of the trickier thematic elements for me.
Doesn't she at one point think she can put a character
Oh, well, I mean, they do make a joke about putting the baby Jesus in her vagina as a manger. Which, all the time I see these Christian ladies book clubs reading this book, and it's like the kind of thing
you do.
And the weird thing is that a lot of them kind of like it, and they're like, I think this is a godly book. And I'm like, no way, really? Like, it's like one of my prouder surprises of this whole thing. Well, because I think that there's actually they hate Kenny, but I do think that for people who are anti-abortion, they are really then like happy when Margot keeps the baby. And then they're really strapped into she should be allowed to have this baby. And they're really mad at the world for making it so hard for her. And so they wind up on her side. And I had not anticipated that dynamic at all when I was writing it. I really was, right? I had just this strong animal desire to keep, when I got pregnant by accident, I really wanted to keep the baby for animal reasons that were not accessible to my rational mind. I think, at the end of the day, we are animals. And when your body is pregnant and is excited about it, like it's going to influence your thinking.
Yeah. Definitely. That's so interesting. So, well, you write a lot about how difficult it is. I mean, how you can't make enough money as a waitress. You need to be at home. Childcare is impossible to get. Like, it's a struggle if you don't have money. It really
is. Because I just assumed I was 26. I had a partner. I had, I didn't have money, but I had like a support network of family and friends. And I just assumed that other people were having children. There must be a way that it works. So when I found out how hard every single aspect of having children was, I was like, why on earth would we set up a society this way? Why would we not at least have like universal pre-K? Like some things seem like real, and yet no.
Yeah. No, I know. Apparently they do it better in France.
Oh, that's what I've heard.
Yeah. That's what my daughter told me. They really encourage, like the pre-K is great. The nurseries are great food. They encourage women to go back to work by making the pre-K so good. But anyway, let's see. So what prevailing message would you like readers to take away from this book?
Well, so I'm always a little bit suspicious of messages, and I do kind of try to not have one. In part because of a traumatic experience reading Ayn Rand in high school, where I was just like, dude, a novel's a rigged game. You can just set up the good guys to win and the bad guys to be sleazy. You can just take any viewpoint you don't like and put it in the mouth of a man with a creepy mustache, and suddenly it's discredited. Like, it really bothered me how rhetorically easy to sway the novel was. And so I always try and write about things that I genuinely feel conflicted about and confused about. And I try and like make it more of a portrait of the question or an explication of how complicated these questions are than to come down on one side or the other. The one thing I think
that's a message.
The one thing I knew I wanted the reader to feel was like, I had in mind movies like Legally Blonde. I wanted them to like feel like kick ass at the end. Like, I wanted readers to feel like their life was their own and they got to do with it what they wanted. And like that they could be like Margot and build any kind of life that they wanted according to their rules. And they don't have to please anybody. And like tragedy isn't inevitable. And by God, even if it is, you should fight against it tooth and nail. I wanted it to have that feeling of like violent hopefulness.
It does. And I love the way Legally Blonde. Yeah. I think my other daughter, I think that's why she wants to be a lawyer. She'll kill me for saying that.
No, but wasn't there literally an uptick in female law applications after Legally Blonde came out? I mean, I think it literally changed the landscape of the gender balance in the legal profession.
Wow. Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, really, Elena. You had such thoughtful really questions. It's so fun getting to talk to you.
I hope you enjoyed the show. I learned a lot about pro wrestling, OnlyFans, single motherhood, fast food, Go Panda Express, and how Margot's Got Money Troubles came to be. Rufi is a fascinating person who just goes for it. I love the fact that her next book sounds nothing like this one. I really like it when artists challenge themselves, don't just recreate what worked the first time. Our next show will be something different. For starters, I'm interviewing a male author. So see you in 2 weeks. And thank you for listening.